Up next, cyber schools. Pennsylvania has 11 cyber charter schools that enroll about 17,000 students. These students learn at home using the internet to connect to teachers and classroom materials. The school districts where the cyber student lives pays the tuition. Now the governor wants to limit what cyber schools can charge. Should the state limit what cyber schools can charge districts for tuition? What do you think of these alternative schools that are growing in popularity? Joanne Barnett joins us now. She is the Chief Operating Officer for the Pennsylvania Virtual Charter School. You're based down in the Norristown area. You have 4,000 students in K through 11th grade now.
11th grade.
The Rendell administration says what we need here is uniform tuition. We would save tens of millions of dollars for Pennsylvania taxpayers, and we wouldn't compromise educational quality at those schools. Sounds like a great deal. How could we pass that up?
I think it is a great deal. One of the issues that we found in terms of cyber charter school funding is that there's been the legislation that our funding should be cut. But if you really look at what's going on in the state of Pennsylvania, I think the governor is really on to something, looking at the total funding model. When we look at funding in our state, it is the varying rates go from somewhere around $6,000 for one district all the way up to $21,000 for another district. And you really have to ask yourself, how can you provide equity in education with that much variation in funding? And cyber charter schools, regardless of where a student lives, we're able to provide that student with the same quality of education. So we really do need to look at the funding model.
But do you agree that if they were to go to a uniform fee, that would go, the tuition I should say, the Rendell administration was proposing, for instance, this year it would have been $5,800, something in that range. Could you deliver the same quality of education?
Oh, absolutely not. And when I talk about a uniform per pupil rate, I'm talking about that would be across the board. The governor has put in place a task force to look at funding across the state for all of the districts in the state of Pennsylvania, and has recognized that there needs to be something done about funding. We certainly, in cyber education, could not deliver services to our students. We could not provide free and appropriate education for our students at $5,800 a year. We were at the hearings a few weeks ago, and the per pupil rate, the average at that point was $7,800. So we're about $2,000 short.
Tim Allwein also joins us. He's Assistant Executive Director of Governmental Relations for the Pennsylvania School Boards Association. Are you trying to put these guys out of business?
Well, I'm glad you asked that question, because that's a very common misconception. We are not trying to put them out of business. In fact, if you go back to 1997 when the charter school law was enacted, I think we were one of the few, one of the first organizations to support the concept of a charter law because, as you know, with Governor Ridge in office at the time, he was pushing vouchers, and we thought charter schools were a very good compromise between giving parents choice but keeping things under the umbrella of public schools.
Well, how about this? Do you think if you went to a uniform tuition that was in the neighborhood of $5,800, that it would have the practical effect of forcing a lot of these schools to close? They simply couldn't deliver the education to their students at that price.
Well, there's two things there. There's the uniform amount, and then there's $5,800. I think if it's $5,800, Dr. Barnett's right, they probably would go out of business. But I think a uniform rate is something that's needed. After all, these kids are all going to the same school, so it doesn't make sense for one school district to pay $8,500 and another school district to pay $5,500 for the same school. What that results in is that people in the wealthier school districts are essentially financing the education of kids from districts that aren't so wealthy at cyber schools, and I don't think that's the way that anybody would want it to work.
Well, but what is the point, though, really? Because we don't have uniform funding. There is that disparity. The Reading School District, I think it was something like $6,000 a kid. Down in New Hope in Bucks County, the difference is $13,000 a child. You're not asking for there to be, in a sense, uniform funding throughout the state. Every district isn't going to be the same. Why are you holding charter schools to to a different standard?
Well, again, we're talking about not so much funding for the district, and you're right, there isn't a uniform funding throughout the district. But again, if you're, take the example that you gave us, why does it make sense for one district to pay so much and the other district to pay less than half of that amount to send a kid to the same school. It doesn't make any sense. And the thing here now is these are taxpayer dollars. These are public dollars that are coming from taxpayers. So it seems to us that it makes more sense that if a child's gone to PA virtual or whatever cyber school, or bricks and mortar charter school for that matter, is you go to the school expenses are X, here's what the cost is, and that cost is split evenly, or at least more evenly than it is now throughout the state. Because I think one of the things it does, and I'm certainly not accusing anybody of doing this, but I think it potentially gives folks a disincentive to market in school districts where the payment is higher. I don't know that that's happening.
Do you do that? Do you hear of other cyber charter schools going for those kids who have the higher tuitions?
Absolutely not. If you were to look at the roster of our students, you would find that the majority of our students are not coming from the districts that have the highest per pupil rates. And to Tim's point, I'd like to speak to the fact that when you talk about uniform funding and cyber charter schools are funded based on the funding model that exists in the state. We didn't create the disparity within the per pupil rates. We inherited it. And so if you fix that, then you will automatically fix what the funding for cyber charter schools.
For folks who don't know a lot about cyber charters, it could look like, well, how difficult can this be? The child is sitting at home in front of a computer and you're just delivering coursework to them. Why can't you do that for $5,800 or $6,000? Explain how this works.
First of all, we are amenable to every code that's there. We're amenable to the public school code, Code 22. We're amenable to the charter school code and to cyber charter school code. So that means that we have to have guidance counselors. We're responsible for having nurses. We not only deal with the child's education, we have to deal with the child's social development. If the child comes to us 2 or 3 grade levels behind, we have to offer supplemental services. We have a Title I program. So it's not simply sitting at the computer. We have certified teachers. We have to support the families, and we're in partnership with parents, but the teachers drive instruction and authenticate learning. So it's not simply sitting there in front of the computer. We are a comprehensive school.